We are in Daniel chapter 3 as we continue our Daniel series. We'll be making our way through this chapter. Life is filled with decisions. From the moment your alarm goes off in the morning, you have a decision to make. Am I going to get up or am I going to hit snooze? How many of you are the snooze crowd? I'm the get up crowd. I'm the no alarm, internal alarm wakes me up crowd, unfortunately. But from that moment, you begin to make decisions. Breakfast, clothes, all kinds of decisions from that moment forward. There's a common belief or mindset that your success or failure is dictated by the decisions that you make. That good decisions result in good stuff, fewer regrets, better life. And that poor decisions, bad decisions result in bad things, bad stuff. And this idea has a level of credibility for sure, right? If you make good decisions in your marriage, you're more likely to have a good marriage. If you make good decisions with your eating habits, you're more likely going to have a healthier life and a healthier body. If you make poor decisions in these areas, you're going to have a poor marriage, poor health. If you make good decisions with your money, you'll have money. If you make bad decisions with your money, then you'll end up in debt and with little money. If you have good habits, you'll have good results. Even in simple things as sports. We're wrapping up a baseball season and starting a little all-star season, and when you're playing a game of baseball, if you make good decisions, then you usually get good results. If you make the decision to catch the ball and throw it to first, and they make the decision to catch it, then that's a good thing. And so everyday life kind of follows this idea that has some credibility, good decisions, good results. But the rest of that story that we all know that live everyday life is that good decisions, you can make good decisions and sometimes end up in terrible life situations. That good decisions do not always prevent bad stuff from happening. You can be a wise decision maker and end up sick. You can be a wise decision maker and end up broke. You can be a wise decision maker and end up jobless or with a strained relationship. You can be a good decision maker and end up divorced or lonely, depressed, in need of help. We get bad decisions often lead to bad results, but what about those moments when you make what appear to be wise decisions and still end up in those bad places? This is where it gets confusing and complicated. When you go to the scriptures, you find both. People that made bad decisions that had good lives, people that seemed to make good decisions that ended up in really bad situations. We get bad decisions often lead to bad results, but what about when good decisions end up with bad results? You see, the reality is that life happens and that we live in a very broken world. And bad things do happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. That's the global and personal impact of sin. So, what happens when I seek to make right, God-honoring decisions and find myself in a tough spot? Find myself in a tough season when it seems like life is unfair in those moments. And as followers of God, these moments, these seasons can challenge our faith. How do I trust God when life does not make sense? When I, in my mind, have made good, right decisions, and yet I find myself in this situation. And then even maybe more importantly, how do I keep from unraveling when trouble arrives in my life seemingly out of nowhere? And that's kind of where we find ourselves in Daniel 3, this very famous story of three young men who made God-honoring decisions, but they find themselves in a tough spot. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the names that we know them by, and all the little variants we hear about that. I saw a little meme this week. Shadrach, it was the name of a coffee shop. Shadrach, Meshach, and a bean to go. My favorite kind of play off of their names is from the theologians at VeggieTales. Their story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is that they're Rack, Shack, and Benny. That's their characters in the VeggieTales video. So these Hebrews have been taken exile by Babylonians. The king takes these kind of first-round draft picks and he trains them in the ways of Babylon. He even gives them Babylonian names and replaces their names that represented God, Yahweh. God blesses them in the midst of this. They all get promotions, but they are living in this constant conflict of values. God's way of living versus the ethics of the foreign culture in which they find themselves. And perhaps their biggest and most kind of confrontational ethic that they have to confront in everyday life is their worship of the one true God. And the constant pull in this foreign culture to bend their knee to worship a false God, which obviously is the violation of their number one command, the Big Ten, that we are to have no other God before us. The king of Babylon, to complicate this even more, this guy named Nebuchadnezzar, has a serious ego problem, doesn't he? If you were here last week, we talked about the dream that he had. And in this dream that Daniel not only interprets, but tells Nebuchadnezzar what his dream is. In this dream is this massive image that has this head of gold. And Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold." Well, you tell that to someone with an ego problem. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "Well, that's pretty cool, but I have a better idea. I'm going to make an image that's not just a head of gold, it's all gold. My kingdom is not going to end." And so he makes this all golden image for the people to worship. It was at that time, the world's biggest selfie, right? This ultimate selfie, a giant golden image. Some scholars believe maybe it was a golden image of a god. Some think maybe it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself. We don't really know. But the point is the same. He's issuing a challenge to Daniel's God. In the dream, there's a head of gold, but in my statue that you will worship, it's all gold. And that's the story we pick up in chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 9 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this image of gold, if you do the math here in the equivalent of our modern terms, this appears to be about 90 feet high, so 9 stories tall. I don't know, maybe Nebuchadnezzar had somewhat of a Napoleon complex or something here. Giant statue, particularly it's of himself. Verse 2, he sent to gather these officials, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So all the VIPs of the kingdom are invited to this dedication ceremony. And by the way, this is a dedication ceremony. You better click accept, right? You better click, yes, I'm coming to the party, or the consequences are severe. So he invites all these people. They come. Verse 3, this group of people, these VIPs, they gather. They gather for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4, here's the instructions. The herald proclaims aloud, "You're commanded," big word there, commanded, not an option here, "you're commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe," which, by the way, is going to be our new instruments in the City Church Band starting next week. The bagpipe. Can you imagine a bagpipe up in this space? We would all leave here with a headache. "Every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace." Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of all these instruments, all the peoples, nations, and languages, they fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the instructions are clear. When the band strikes up, fall down and worship. The word worship is used 10 different times in this short amount of verses for emphasis. And it's a strong word of homage to that should be reserved for God alone. And Nebuchadnezzar says you're going to worship. You're going to give your respect and honor and homage to this statue. And if you disobey, you will be a s'more, right? You're going to be incinerated in this fiery furnace. There's a level in this text, even in the first 3 chapters, that we see a level of insecurity in Nebuchadnezzar. That he sets this statue up and says, I command you to bow down and worship. This is not uncommon for him to demand and command this type of respect. And his plan works to perfection. The people fall down and worship except for 3 God followers. Verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. And so we have tattlers, tattling on the Hebrews. When I was a boy, elementary age boy, we lived in Greenville, North Carolina, and I lived beside a tattler. Whatever Devin did, my little neighbor, friend, girl, not girlfriend, friend, girl, had to tattle. Unfortunately, we went to the same school, and we're in 1st and 2nd grade together. Whatever Devin did at school got exposed in the car ride on the way home. I lived beside a tattler. I got my revenge in different ways, but she was a tattler. The word here, maliciously accused, means to eat something, to eat it to pieces, to chew it up and spit it out. That's what a tattler does, right? And so verse 8, the tattlers, and then verse 9, they have to remind the king. They're such schmoozers here in this text. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree, in case he forgot. Every man who hears the sound of these instruments shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down, don't forget, Neb, they shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And then look at the language here. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They remind Nebuchadnezzar what he said. They tattle on, in the language here, those Jews. There's almost an element of kind of an anti-Semitic jealousy going on here, and their accusations are very clear. They do not give the king his due respect. They pay no attention to you, and they do not acknowledge your gods. They do not worship your gods. They deserve this fiery furnace. They deserve to die. 13, predictable response from Nebuchadnezzar. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. So Nebuchadnezzar, in his very predictable way, he flips out and he brings in these subordinates. 14, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? He tries to pull like the shock and awe on them. Like, I can't believe that you would do this. I can't believe that you would defy me. Do you know who I am? That you would defy me. 15. Now, if you're ready, we'll give you a second chance here. When you hear the sound of the instruments, fall down, worship the image that I have made, and all will be well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Then look at this phrase. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar says. He gives them a second chance. Look, we'll write you up this time. We're going to put it in your personnel file. You have a verbal reprimand. Now, we're going to give you a second chance. Maybe you misunderstood the command. Maybe there's an element here that obviously Nebuchadnezzar's invested a lot in these young men. He doesn't want to just get rid of them. And so because of the investment, maybe he likes them. He gives them a second chance, which is not like Nebuchadnezzar. He's kind of a reactionary, make it happen kind of guy. And he says, look, I'm going to give you a chance to recant one more time to make myself clear. Here's what happens. And if you choose to worship, everything's okay. It's all good. But if you refuse, then you are toast, right? Fiery furnace. Then he uses this phrase, and what can God do to deliver you from me? To which God in heaven chuckles, right? I'll show you. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are facing a life-death decision. Concede or die. The bigger question of this narrative, though, is will we trust God? Even when we have to make a right and bold decision and the odds are stacked against us. You see, this might be a good time for compromise if you're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Maybe they can justify it in their minds. Maybe they'll do the hey, we can pretend we're bowing down outwardly. We'll fall down outwardly, but we'll be standing inwardly, right? Maybe it's a good time to practice their planks. They'll just get on the ground. You know what a plank is, right? Good time to do a workout. Maybe their shoe is untied in this moment. Be a good time to bend over. Maybe they can rationalize this out. Look, we have family. We have kids. There's a reason for us to stay alive. Maybe they don't like fire, and just their rationale is, man, fire's hot, and I'm not a big fan of being thrown in it, so I'm just going to bow. Is it really that big of a deal? Because I'm really a worshiper of the true God in my heart, and so maybe I'll still be a worshiper of God, but compromise in this moment. Did you know that our compromise happens most often in the smallest areas of life, when it's the easiest to justify our decisions? Most of the time, we're not facing life and death decisions like this, but the call to compromise, to give in those moments often comes when it's very easy to kind of justify why we're doing what we're doing. But for these young men, the decision is not a decision. The decision's already been made. 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, can we have a few days to think about this? Are you sure this is the direction you want to go? Give us some time here. We need to contemplate it. We need to at least do a huddle here." No. We have no need to answer you in this matter. The decision is not a decision. It's already been decided. There's no reason for us to think about it. There's no reason for us to try to justify it. You see, we simply serve and follow a different king. And when your primary citizenship is in a different kingdom, under the sovereign rule of an eternal king who is the king, it's not a question of if there's going to be a conflict of values. It's a matter of when that conflict's going to come. And what am I going to do when that happens? But these three young men, they've already made their choice. And obviously this has been something in the works since way back in chapter 1 when they made the decision hey, we're going to follow God and trust God in this area. They've already laid the foundation here. And then these two magnificent verses, 17 and 18. "If this be so, if we get thrown in the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king." Here's the answer to your question, Nebuchadnezzar. Our God is able to deliver us. If he chooses to do so, he can deliver us. He is powerful enough to do so, and he is a deliverer. He is a rescuer. And so he can deliver us from the furnace and from your hand. And then 18, I love 18. "But if not," and how big are those three words? But if not, but if not, faith, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. God can, God will, but even if he does not, even if we die, we will trust him. We believe God can, we expect God will, but we trust him even if he does not. You see, they do not seek their own death, but neither do they shirk from it, do they? We believe God can, we believe God will, but even if he does not, we will continue to trust him. We will continue to believe in him. God is active, God is sovereign, God is powerful, God cares, God can be trusted, even when God-honoring decisions leave me in trouble. But we will not bow, even if God in his divine plan does not intervene. Even if we die, we will continue to trust him. You see, it's easy to trust God in the uncomplicated times. But what about when you are following God and things go south? What about when you feel like you're making right and wise decision? You feel like you are sincerely seeking to follow Christ in your life and you lose the job. And the marriage still fails. And the cancer shows up and death comes unexpectedly. And there doesn't seem to be any answer to your prayers when things are falling apart. Will I trust Him when it makes no sense to do so because of what's happening in my life? Will I believe, will I trust that God is bigger? Since we're quoting VeggieTales. Do I believe God is bigger than the boogeyman? Godzilla, the monsters on TV? A little kid song, what it's really saying is, do I trust God in the scary moments of life? In the complicated, complex moments of life? Do I believe God is bigger than whatever I'm facing in this moment? Well, Nebuchadnezzar, you can imagine what's going on here. I mean, the dude gets furious. Shocker, right? So you know the story if you've been in church. He says, make the fiery furnace extra toasty. Heat it up 7 times hotter. Make it like, I don't know, Phoenix, Arizona in July hot, right? Make it Alabama in August hot. We had it Alabama June. Now we're taking it to Alabama August. Make it 7 times hotter. And clothe those guys. Clothe them. Put them in clothes. Make them human torches. And then he orders his henchmen to throw them in. And the flames are so intense, the heat is so intense that it takes out his cronies. It takes out the soldiers who are throwing them in. And so this trio is thrown into the furnace. A lot of scholars believe that it was some type of kiln-shaped furnace where you could peer in. And so Nebuchadnezzar has a clear view from the side and plans to watch them burn alive for defying him. And we all know that what happens next is what puts this story in the Bible storybooks. It's what puts it on our radar. Verse 24, King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose up in haste. He declares to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? Did you guys make a mistake? They answered and said to the king, true, O king, 3. We put 3 in. He's astonished. How many did we throw in? Wasn't it 3? There's not 3, 25. He answered, but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. He's like, there's not 3 here, there's 4. And that 4th one appears to be godlike, like a divine figure. God enters the fire with them. Now, who is this God figure? We don't know. Is this an angel? Is it an appearance of God, like an incarnated view of the Son of God here? We don't know. It's not how these writers would have been thinking in that time. But whatever it is a divine representation of the one true God. And God is with them. God enters the fire with them. So here's our truth here. God does not leave us alone in the furnace, in the fires of life. It's right back to Isaiah 43, our call to worship. But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine, he says. And when you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. When you're through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. The flame will not consume you. This is what's happening in Daniel 3, right? For I am the Lord your God, he declares. I'm the Holy One of Israel. I'm your Savior. You're precious in my eyes, honored. I love you. Fear not, for I'm with you. The promises of Isaiah 43 coming true in a realistic way in Daniel 3, that the presence of God was not evident. Don't miss this. The presence of God was not evident until they were in the fire. because the sweetness of his presence is often found in the flames and not outside of them. You see, they made God-honoring, courageous decisions in spite of adversity. They displayed God-honoring faith. And guess what? They ended up in the furnace, in the fire. Seems unfair. They stood up. They were courageous. They were bold. Surely God will rescue them. But they end up in the furnace. But it is in the furnace that God shows up. You know why? Because the hero of this story is not these three young men. The hero of this story is God. This story is not ultimately about the incredible faith of the Hebrews. It's about the faithfulness of the God of the Hebrews. Now, we know the story. Nebuchadnezzar calls them out. There's no evidence they've even been in the furnace. There's no singed hair. There's no singed clothes. There's no smell of smoke. There's no burned scars. They are unscathed when they come out of this fiery furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar's got words to say about this, like he did at the end of 2, verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree." When the king makes a decree, you sit up and pay attention. "Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," here we go again, "shall be torn limb from limb, their houses laid in ruins, for there's no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is kind of a gruesome guy, isn't he? "Don't bow down, I'm going to burn you alive. Curse their God, I'm going to rip you from limb to limb." This is Nebuchadnezzar. In his decree, he acknowledges the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not the boys, but the God. It's always about God's glory and not ours. It's always about who he is. It's always about worshiping him, not us. And then this new decree, speak against God and be torn apart limb by limb. What a nice guy. We'll see kind of the rest of the Nebuchadnezzar story next week. More dreams, more acknowledgments of God, even though he's not really a worshiper of the true God. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar lives in a culture where there's lots of gods in his mind, so he's just simply paying homage to another god on the list. But there's some key gospel truths that we should take home from this famous story. Let me mention them. Remember that following Jesus does not guarantee you a trouble-free life. As a matter of fact, it might be just the opposite. That Jesus says, while we're in this world, that trouble will come. And that the promise that we rest in is that he has overcome it. Not that you are an overcomer of the trouble, but that he is the overcomer. And that we rest in him. You see, we've talked about this. We'll continue to talk about it in this series, but we live in the reality of a clash of kingdoms. That we are citizens of a spiritual kingdom, living as temporary exiles in an earthly kingdom. And our values and our ethics and our morals will clash with the earthly kingdom in which we live, and that is a formula for trouble. And so what I encourage you to do is to learn to lean into Jesus now, so that when the weight of the brokenness comes, that we will be more prone to trust him and lean into him. And I'm not just talking about like an us versus them mentality, and they're the bad people and we're the good people and all the liberals and all the conservatives. Like, I'm not talking about that. We're missing the point of the spiritual kingdom if we turn it into that. What I'm talking about is that we live in a world that is filled with brokenness outside of us and inside of us. And there will be a collision of kingdoms. Will I bend my knee in submission to the King? Or will I live sitting on the throne of my own heart? We'll circle back to that in a moment. Second takeaway. Believe that God can. Expect God will. and trust him when he does not. That was the mantra of these boys, right? We believe our God can. We believe he's able. But they didn't stop there, did they? They said, we believe our God is able, and we believe that he will. Their faith went beyond just God's capable of doing this. Their faith, even though we ended up in the fiery furnace, their faith was God can and God will. They trusted that he would act. They trusted and believed that he would come through. But if he does not, we will trust him even in that moment. So let me ask you a question. Could God have extinguished the fire before they were even placed in the fire? Absolutely. Spoken word, fire's out, right? The miracle could have been, we keep trying to throw these boys in and the fire keeps disappearing. That wasn't the miracle. God could have extinguished the fire, but instead, he was with them in the fire. You see, God often saves us in the fire and not from the fire. We love from the fire. We love not having to face it. We love not having to go through it. But the fire is where God tends to do his deepest work. The fire is where God transforms and shapes. The fire is where God makes us depend and rest and trust in him. So, if you're in the flames today, if you're in the fires, I want you to hear me that God is with you and he's doing his work. Trust him. One of the Old Testament names for God that is fulfilled in the New Testament is the name Emmanuel. The name Emmanuel, if you know kind of your Christmas 101 stuff, the name Emmanuel, when Jesus is born, name him Emmanuel because that phrase means God is with us. With us. He's with us. Some of you are there today, like, I don't understand what you're doing, God. I don't understand it. I don't understand why I'm going through this trial, this fire. I don't understand why I'm facing this. Well, first we got to back up and say, it might be because we're stupid, right? Sometimes it's that. Sometimes stupid gets us in the fire. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. God doesn't save us from stupid. Sometimes stupid gets us in the fire. That's the bad stuff, bad decisions ends in bad stuff. But some of you are in a situation where you feel like I've really tried to make God-honoring decisions and I just find myself in this season. I find myself here. And that is the natural question of like, I don't understand what you're doing, God. And God's response to us through this story is like, I know you don't, but will you trust me in the fire? Will you trust me in the fire? So I like, when I read this, I kind of walked away this week and listened to another guy preaching on this, that his question was, based on their response here, like, will I take a dare on God? Will I take a dare on God? Not just the kind of courtesy to God, like, hey, I believe in you. I believe you're able. But will I take a dare on God that says, not only do I believe you're able, but I believe that you will. That's taking a dare on God. Not just God's capable, but I'm trusting that God will. And even if he doesn't, I'll still trust him. All right, how about this one? I'm gonna rip off John Calvin here because I just love the way he phrases this. Let's not forget from this story, we also remember like our heart is a factory of idols. Our heart is a factory of idols. You see, Nebuchadnezzar built a statue in the desert and required people to worship it. A 90-foot golden statue and commanded them to worship. But don't mistake that for the real idolatry of Nebuchadnezzar. The real idolatry of Nebuchadnezzar was in his heart. Because behind every idol is me. behind every idol is self. You see, idolatry for us is not putting up the 90-foot statue in the backyard. If you take that route, then that is a display of your idolatry. But that's not what most of us are doing, right? Idolatry for us is making, same thing Nebuchadnezzar did, making created things, often the gifts of God. Making created things the most important things. Making created things the ultimate things in our lives. You see, our God, small g God, our gods are the things or the people that we are most concerned about, that we think about the most, that affect our lives the most, that we allow to become the ultimate in our lives, the most important things in our lives. And we have to be conscious of our potential idols, and we have to surrender these things regularly to God. And I say this consistently here at City Church because it's so important for us to embed it in our thinking that most often what we're talking about here are good things, not bad things, not the I know I shouldn't do that. Now, sometimes it is that. Sometimes it's I'm choosing this and know it's wrong. But sometimes it's just taking those good gifts, those good things in our lives and making them the ultimate things in our lives. And I use these illustrations all the time. Kids are an awesome thing. Kids are a tremendous blessing. I can't imagine my life without my 4, right? But the moment that I take these good gifts of God and I make them the ultimate thing in my life, I'm turning them into an idol. And not only is that wrong for me, but it is unfair to them. They weren't created for that. Marriage, money, things, sports. Like, how many things can we put in this category that are good things in life? But the idolatry of our hearts, this heart that is a factory of idols, constantly producing idols, the temptation of our heart is to take those good things and put them in the place in our lives that is only reserved for God and God alone, making them the ultimate things. And what I've said to us repeatedly, because this is for me too, is by making good things the ultimate things, I am doing a disservice to those good things. I can only love Ash as God desires for me to love her when she's not the ultimate thing in my life. Man, what a great gift she is, a blessing to me and my greatest gift in life. But if we make each other the ultimate thing, it's not fair to her. That is a spot for God and God alone. What a gift our kids are. But to make them the ultimate, most important thing in life, what a disservice that is to them. That's not loving them as God desires. And so we have to be conscious of this heart that is prone to produce and manufacture these idols. Did you know that the ultimate freedom that we have in Christ is when God is on the throne of our hearts? When it's not a thing or a person or something. It is only when God and God alone. That is where we find the ultimate freedom to love our spouse as God desires, to love our kids as God desires, to invest ourselves in our jobs and our careers as God desires, to have a healthy relationship with money as God desires. It's only when God is on the throne of our hearts that we have the freedom to enjoy His gifts as they were intended to be enjoyed. And then I want to just end with this take home that we do every week. Don't forget from this story, because we tend to make this story about us. We tend to put us in the story. But Jesus is the greater rescuer in the biblical story. Like, this story fits within this bigger and greater redemptive story. You see, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we were in a hopeless situation. We were helpless, unable to do anything on our own about our sin situation. We needed a rescuer. We needed a deliverer. Enter Jesus. Jesus came from a heavenly kingdom, lived as an exile under a pagan ruler in a dominant world empire. He was put to death because he was faithful, because he was obedient. He faced the fires of hell. He endured the wrath of a holy God so that he might become the ultimate rescuer. And when the fires of sin and death and hell threatened our eternal existence, Jesus enters the furnace for us and brings us out. We escape death without even the smell of smoke. And now we decree, there is no one like our God. He is faithful. That's why he is the hero of the story. Because Jesus is the greater Savior. He is the ultimate deliverer. And now he is with us in the fire. If you're like me, I read these stories and I think, what would I do in this situation? Anybody ever done that? Like, what would I do? What would I do if this is me? I'm in the Shadrach, Meshach, I'm Daniel in the lion's den. What would I do? Now, when we do that, it's a fair question. We ask it all the time. But let me kind of shift our perspective on it. It's the wrong question. It's the wrong question because it puts the emphasis on us. What would I do? Do I have enough faith? Do I have enough courage? God has not promised grace to face every possible desperate situation in life. Do you know that? He's not promised the grace to face every possible scenario out there. What if I find myself here? What he has promised is to strengthen and sustain us in the ones that he allows into our lives. What he has promised is that if he leads us into the fire, that he will provide the grace that we need in the fire. See, here's where the challenge is. It's not, what would I do in this moment? Would I be able to stand like Daniel? Man, I don't know if I have enough faith. That puts us in the story. Makes the story all about us. The story's not about us. The story is about the God of the Hebrews. It's about our God, our Savior. So here's our bigger challenge and our bigger question beyond the fiery furnace question. Am I going to declare my allegiance to God and trust him in the everyday battles of my life? That's where the rubber meets the road right there. Not what am I going to do if I stand before Nebuchadnezzar. Not what am I going to do if I face the lion's den. The struggle is, am I in the everyday reality of life going to declare my allegiance to God and trust him there? You see, I'm fighting the same battle in my heart every single day over far lesser issues. I'm not facing whether I want to be thrown into the fiery furnace or not. But it's the same battle that I'm facing every day in my heart. Am I going to bend my knee to the idols that invade my heart in the everyday grind of life? That's where our struggle is. Am I going to bend my knee to those idols that want to steal my allegiance and take supremacy in my life that is to be reserved for God alone? Or will I live in submission to his plan, his purposes for my life? Which, by the way, is where you find life and meaning and fulfillment in life. I stand on this stage and say loudly and boldly to you, I'm no hero of the faith. I'm no hero of the faith. You see, every time I bow to the idols of my heart, I'm choosing the created over the Creator. And it's why we need the gospel. It's why we need Jesus. It's why he's the hero of our faith, because he is the author and finisher. And it is on the cross that Jesus took the consequences that I deserve from my spiritual idolatry, that God's deserved judgment was placed on his son, and he paid the price of my hell so that I might pass through the fires of everyday life and emerge safely on the other side, not because of my strength, but because of his. You see, this is not about my faithfulness or my faithlessness. It is about his faithfulness that is credited to my account. a faithfulness that far exceeds the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and every hero of the faith that we put on the pedestal, a faithfulness that is reserved for Christ and Christ alone, because He is the deliverer. He is the rescuer. Bad things happen to good people. And at times, God delivers in spectacular ways. And at other times, His rescue looks different. The question and the challenge for us is, will I trust Him in the fire of everyday life? So let me end with this. Hebrews 11. We call it the Hall of Faith. This huge list of all these people that were faithful in all different types of circumstances. And we kind of know all the popular ones. And then the writer of Hebrews gets down to kind of the end of his list. And he says, check this out, Hebrews 11:32. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David, Samuel, all the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Man, I can get behind this list, right? Wow. Quenched fire, like all this stuff. This is spectacular deliverance. And then look how the text twists, how it turns, how it pivots. But some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. Like, I don't want to be on that list. Same list. Hebrews 11. God delivers in spectacular ways and then turns right around. But what about all of these? Tortured, afflicted, suffered, sawn in half, and not like by a magician put back together, right? What about this? Like, God delivers in a different way. Of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, dens, caves of the earth, and all these, both lists, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. In other words, it wasn't about them. Since God had provided something better than that, better than the spectacular rescue, better than the faith, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. What was better? And then he tells us, and we go to this verse all the time here at City Church because it's so important. Therefore, since we're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, which is what chapter 11 was, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And if we are thinking back to those previous verses, what is that race? Well, for some, it's spectacular deliverance. For some, it's torture, right? Mistreated. Sometimes it's bad things happening to good people. No matter what type of race it is, it's not about us. What are we doing? Verse 2, looking to Jesus. It's Jesus. He is the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. It's all back to Jesus. That He is the creator and the finisher of our faith. And no matter what that race looks like, no matter if it's spectacular deliverance, as we see in Daniel 3, or no matter if it's God's taking you through the fire and there's not a way out here. There's not a way out. At the end of the day, whatever the race is, our eyes stay fixated on Jesus. Because it's not about how strong your faith is. It's about how faithful He is. Which, guess what? Gives me the faith. Gives me the faith to go through it. What was the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Was it like, look how big and bad we are, King, do whatever you want to do us, we got this. No, their faith was, our God is able, and our God will. And even if He does not, we will trust Him. Why? Why? Because He
is faithful, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Let's bow our heads for prayer.